Hey, everybody, welcome to episode 11 of The Space Between Your Ears. I'm Brian Cady, your humble host of this podcast, presented by Godzilla Media. And we are sponsored by our friends over at Mohawk Honda, Freeman's Bridge Road in Scotia Glenville, here in the upstate New York area where I am located. And selection is king this summer, so make sure if you're going to try to trade in your vehicle, that you go to a dealership that's actually going to have a selection for you to choose from. And if you're going to do that, why not go to the dealership with the biggest selection in the entire area? Make sure you go to Mohawk Honda. Reach out to our friends there, Freeman's Bridge Road in Scotia Glenville, where they always go out of their way to please you. Also, we're sponsored by Johnstone Supply, 2600 6th Avenue in Troy, your one-stop shop for all your heating, cooling, and refrigeration needs. And yeah, as far as reaching out to me, the Twitter handle, as you'll see if you're watching the YouTube video, scrolling across the screen along with our sponsors. My Twitter handle, at Brian Cady. My name all is one word, BrianCady. And of course, the email address, if you have any comments about the show, any mental health stories you want to share with me, and things of the sort, brian.cady at Godzilla Media. That's Gozilla media.com. Now, if you follow me on Facebook or Twitter, you will know that I teased that this could be, and most likely will be, I should say, the shortest episode to date. And I'm going to try my best to keep my emotions in check. I can't guarantee that. This is just there's something that has to be addressed. And I know in the first 10 episodes, I've usually come on here and spoken my truth, talked about my mental health journey, or I've had different people. I've had a couple of good friends of mine, Kennedy Copeland, Marcus Patterson, share their mental health journeys. A few medical professionals, Liz Simitowski, Bryn Saltis, Powell Coachella. They've come on and shared some of their struggles, but also talk about their work in the mental health field. But I needed to take this episode, or I felt like I needed to take this episode to focus on a very specific topic that is very newsworthy recently. And it's mind-boggling to me, all the different angles going on with this. So right now, the Olympics are going on as of recording this, which is August 4th, 2021. As of recording this, the postponed Summer Olympics from 2020 are still currently going on in Tokyo, Japan. And one of the prevailing, if not the prevailing and dominating storyline thus far has been Simone Biles and the U.S. women's gymnastics team. And the polar opposite reactions that have been going on involving Simone Biles really hammered something home to me that I've been trying to get a grasp on when I had Liz Simitowski, when I had Bryn Saltis on, when I had Powell Coachella on. And it's something that deeply disturbs me and bothers me to the point where I legitimately had trouble sleeping last night because I had all these thoughts popping into my head about what I wanted to say regarding this topic. And this is one of those scenarios where I feel like there's a lot of people that need to learn. There's still this massive disconnect that at one point looked like the size of the Grand Canyon. I thought recently went from the Grand Canyon to Yellowstone Park, and now we're back to the Grand Canyon again. There seems to be a massive chasm and I don't know how to explain it very well. But I think I can at least try to put together what I'm thinking this is. Now, if you've known me well enough, not just through this podcast, but in life in general, I'm a massive sports fan. And a big thing I do for work is PA announcing for various sporting events. And as a big-time sports fan and a PA announcer, you get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. You get to see the whole spectrum across the board when it comes to sports. And I hate to say it, but a lot of the time when it comes to the bad and the ugly, those stories, those occurrences, those experiences have to do with fans in some shape, way, or form. Fans in sports bring out what I think is the ugliest side of people, especially those who are supremely loyal. And I'll use air quotes around that word loyal, because everything goes from they or the team and turns into we. Like they actually think their fandom gives them this higher ground to look down upon those who are competing in that field of sport, regardless of what it may be. Baseball, basketball, football, hockey, tennis, soccer, volleyball, doesn't matter. Fans feel like there's expectations as blown up as one can make them. Fans think they have a right to a certain level of performance. And if an athlete doesn't meet that level, then they're met with vitriol beyond belief. To me, I get a lot of disgust and disdain towards fans in that regard. I'll give you a very realistic example, a perfect example from my own life. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm a Yankee fan. I grew up a huge New York Yankees fan. I went to New York Yankees games with my grandfather. I've been to Yankees games for school field trips. Like, the Yankees have been a part of my life since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. All right? But over time, as I matured, as my brain developed, I came to realize and accept that you can't win every game. You can't win every series. You can't win every championship. It's just unrealistic. It's never going to happen. Like the Yankees that existed in the 40s and early 50s, that doesn't happen anymore. To transition to another sport, the Boston Celtics, who won, what was it, 10, 11 titles? That doesn't happen anymore. In like, what was it, 10, 11 titles in like 15 years, something crazy like that. The UCLA men's basketball team, who won all those championships in such a short time span with John Wooden as their head coach, that kind of stuff doesn't happen anymore. Free agency, transfer portals, one and done rules. Things have changed so much in the last 40, 50, 60 years of sports that there's too much parity for any kind of dynasty like that to exist anymore. Now, can you form a franchise that's consistently in the running? Yes. But it's next to damn near impossible to have that happen anymore, where you just win championship after championship after championship after championship. Now, some might say the New England Patriots try to prove us otherwise, but you gotta remember, their 6 Super Bowls came over 20 years. It wasn't like they won 6 out of 8. It took 6 in 20. All right? So, but I grew to know this at a young age, relatively young, like probably middle school, high school range, we'll say. Which means I had what we call common sense. But what's one of the biggest reasons, if you go and ask any non-Yankees fan to give their top 3 reasons for why they don't like the Yankees, or dare I say hate the Yankees, I could probably tell you, I would say about at least 80% of people answering that survey would say one of those top 3 reasons is the fan base. And it's because, for whatever reason, that fan base has this holier-than-thou attitude, like they deserve to win the division every year. They deserve to be in the American League Championship Series every year. They deserve to be in the World Series every year. It doesn't work like that. For the longest time, that was the same thing with the Dallas Cowboys. And some would say that's kind of worn off, but there are still some pretty imaginary Cowboys fans that, whatever. Any fan of LeBron, not any fan, but a lot of fans of LeBron are kind of the same way too. No matter where LeBron goes, they should automatically win the championship. It doesn't work like that. All right. I gotta be honest, out of the 4 major pro sports in America, I think the only sport where you don't see fan bases like that is in pro hockey. Because in the NHL, there's parity to an extreme in a way in the NHL. Because there haven't been any real dynasties since what? We're talking about like legitimate dynasties. What, the Edmonton Oilers of the early 80s? All right. And that was 35 years ago, 40 years ago. But you get my point. Fans are out of control sometimes. You'll hear stories of, just as an example, I want to say it was 6 or 7 years ago when I was still doing local sports radios. There was a story about how at the end of an Albany High School, Bethlehem High School basketball game, fans were throwing water bottles at the referees on the court because they didn't like the calls they were getting at the end of the game. Like, just stupid shit. All right. Now let's bring this back around to what I'm getting at for today. Simone Biles, for those of you who have been living under a rock, I'll explain this. Simone Biles, who many are calling the greatest of all time in women's gymnastics, particularly U.S. gymnasts. She was doing qualifying. She was going through the qualifying rounds in Tokyo. And to coin the nickname phrase for it, she got a case of what she would call, what's been called the twisties. Essentially, anytime she was doing any of her maneuvers, she felt like this weird out of body experience. Like she wasn't in control of her body, and it was leading to poor execution. Or it was going to lead to poor execution if she tried to do certain maneuvers. Which led to originally her pulling out of the team competition finals, and then eventually her pulling out of individual finals events, which I believe included I believe it was a floor exercise, the uneven bars, I think there was one other event, but don't quote me. And eventually she wound up going into an event she qualified poorly in. She qualified 6th in the balance beam. So technically, she's going into the final for that event, not expected to medal, and she still came out with a bronze medal. Now we'll work our way back around to that last part in a second. But let me give you an analogy for the twisties quick. So an analogy for the twisties would be, and these are legit stories. This isn't something crazy. A legit story of connection. Would be something called the yips. Now, a lot of people when they hear that, they think of golfers, like Greg Norman when he fell apart at the Masters that one year. Anytime somebody completely loses their shit mentally and ends up going for like 12 over par in one hole, they'll call that somebody getting the yips. Let me just give you other examples. Currently in baseball, there's a pitcher named John Lester, who last I knew, I believe he's still with the Washington Nationals, but earlier in his career, and something that's really followed him throughout his career, even to this day, Lester had this weird mental block about throwing to first base from the pitcher's mound, which led to a point where he essentially abandoned the entire idea of trying to pick off runners when they got to first base. And even would sometimes, if you fielded a ground ball back to him at the pitcher's mound, instead of taking the ball and throwing it to first, he'd take his entire glove with the ball in it and toss it to first. Another example is an older pitcher named Rick Ankiel. He was a Cardinals prospect and made it to the majors. I want to say this was early 2000s, like 01, 02, 03, something like that. His problem was he couldn't stop throwing wild pitches to the point where he got sent back to the minor leagues and then transitioned from being a pitcher to an outfielder. And then he came back up through the majors as an outfielder and was relatively serviceable for a little while. And then there's just some guys who just would completely lose control of accuracy in the strike zone. Guys like Mark Wohlers, Daniel Bard, stuff like that. That's just one thing. I'll give you another example. Jared Saltalamacchia, and I'm just looking this up, so bear with me. He was a catcher when he first came up through the Texas Rangers farm system. But in 2010, he suddenly had this mental block. And if you've ever seen, I want to say it was Major League 2? Yes. You ever seen the movie Major League 2? There's actually a character that has this same issue in the movie. He had an issue throwing the ball back to the pitcher after each pitch. And to the point where Saltalamacchia got sent back down to the minors, had to even seek help from a sports psychologist with the issue, and then eventually worked his way back into the majors, won a World Series with the Red Sox in 2013. But at that point, he had mostly been transitioned into a first baseman in DH with occasional catching duties. Yankee fans, Chuck Knobloch, he had a time towards the end of his career where he just completely lost. He had a complete mental block when it came to throwing the ball from his position at second base to first base for an out. It happens, okay? And the terrific thing now, as opposed to even as recent as 10 years ago, is that in these last 5 to 10 years, mental health has seen a lot of progress made. There's more resources readily available, whether it be with an actual person and a sports psychologist, or even just materials you can find online, or just apps you can use on your phone. Like I mentioned the apps Calm and Headspace on this show a few times in the past. Those are terrific apps just for guided meditations or just stuff to listen to, just to take your mind off the shit. There's so much stuff out there now compared to 5 or 10 years ago, let alone 20, 30 years ago, that it's just, there's tremendous tools out there. But just because we have all these tools for those suffering doesn't excuse what happens on the other end of it, which is where we go back to Simone Biles. And if you recall, there was a tennis player, Naomi Osaka, who was suffering with mental health issues, dropped out of a couple tournaments, even dropped out of one of the 4 Grand Slam tournaments recently, Wimbledon, dropped out of that because of mental health issues. She has since come back around, and she got knocked out in like the quarterfinals, I think, of the tennis, of the women's singles tennis tournament at the Olympics. But that's a case where it showed she took the time off, got her stuff together, got her mind right. Once the mind was right, made sure the body was still right, and then went out and performed to the best of her abilities. Now you get to Simone Biles. The body's right. The mind's not there. So what's the reaction out of this? Every living in mommy's basement keyboard warrior decides to get on Twitter or get on Instagram or make a little video on their Snapchat or their TikTok, and they want to spew all this vitriol in the direction of Simone Biles, saying that she's not the real graceful time, she's trash, she's a waste of a spot, she's letting her team down, she's letting her whole country down, why'd she even go to begin with? Why? Like, I know I'll never get a good answer about that. I never will, never have, and never will. I'll probably get some bullshit answer, honestly, from people when I ask them. They're like, "Oh, it's the emotion, the emotion of the moment. Oh, I was just a little heated. That's all. No big deal." It may not be a big deal to you, but go walk a mile in her shoes. Go walk a mile in the shoes of anyone who suffers from mental health issues. Go walk a mile in Naomi Osaka's shoes, who was #1 in the world before she took time off to address her mental health issues. To me, it's disgusting. It's deplorable. And makes me sick. Like, physically sick. When you look at Simone Biles, you shouldn't crucify her. You shouldn't abandon her. You should praise her. What she is doing to provide an international outlet, to open the eyes of journalists and fans around the world about mental health, that's goddamn amazing. Now, let me also remind you of something. Her mental health goes beyond just the twisties. Okay? Her mental health goes back a while. Because you know what you're forgetting about Simone Biles that I was reminded of a few days ago? Remember the name Larry Nassar? If you don't, I'll educate you. Larry Nassar was a part of the U.S. gymnastics coaching staff for many years. And he ended up turning into a grade A certified perverted jackass of a pedophile, essentially, and a sexual assaulter of the gymnasts he was coaching. Simone Biles is the last active member of USA Gymnastics to survive the horrors of Larry Nassar. Think about that for a second. All the other ones have gone to the wayside. All the Ali Reismans, the Michaela Maronis, they've all gone away. They've all gone in their own direction in life. Simone Biles is the only one left. She's the only one who, when you look at her, you can think of him. You don't think that weighs on her mind a little bit? Just a tad? Another reason you should applaud her, because it shows the difference between now and 25 years ago. You're going to ask, what the hell was 25 years ago? Allow me to remind you of that. 25 years ago was 1996. It was the Summer Olympics in Atlanta, Georgia. And the USA women's gymnastics team needed to meet a certain score on one final jump to win the gold medal. And the person that they decided to shove out there for that jump was Carrie Strug, who couldn't even walk. They essentially took a girl, a young woman, who could only walk on one foot at that point, and said, "You'll be fine. Gut it out." Now, obviously, it created an Olympic moment that'll live on for the rest of time. Between her jump and the visual of her coach carrying her with a cast on her freaking leg as they're going to the medal podium. But think about that. They were willing to tell a gymnast essentially on one leg to go and perform. Simone Biles wasn't even physically injured, and she still said no. You're not going to put me through what you put Carrie through. I've somehow kept my composure very well. And I'm happy for that. But I'm supremely proud of Simone Biles. I'm supremely proud of any athlete who is using their platform, whether it be now during the Olympics or any time before or after. I'm supremely proud of any athlete or anybody of any measure of fame who uses their platform to bring more eyes and more ears to the concerns of mental health. Here's the other thing. This is the last thing I'll say before I wrap it up. Of all the times for people to be so vigilant about wanting to criticize Simone Biles, this is the worst time to do it. The absolute worst time. Let me ask you a question. What do you think is the leading cause of death for troops the last 2 years? Suicide. What's one of the biggest and most rampant problems in this country right now? Drug overdose. But you, Mr. or Miss Keyboard Warrior, you want to sit in your mommy's basement, think you know everything about anything, and think you suddenly have a doctorate in psychology, and you want to sit there typing away about how Simone Biles is a disgrace and a disappointment and is letting down an entire country and had no right to do this to her team. That she's taken away from the Olympic experience. This is where I'm going to lose my emotions for a second. This is where I'm going to lose my control for a second. I'm going to very calmly and politely, I suppose, tell all of those keyboard warriors, fuck you. Politely, fuck you. As somebody who had two best friends within less than 12 months each commit suicide because of mental health issues. As someone who had two childhood friends from grade school die from drug overdoses within 2 years of each other. Fuck you. There's no place for your vitriol. There's no place for your anger. There's no place for your discontent when it comes to this issue. When it comes to Simone Biles. There's no room for it. There's no excuse for it. If anyone should be ashamed of themselves and is a real disgrace, it's you who are trying to put down Simone Biles. So cheers to Simone. Cheers to all the other athletes like the Naomi Osakas or the Kevin Loves, who use their platforms to discuss mental health. Cheers to all of you who have watched on YouTube or listened on your various podcast platforms to this show. I hope you continue to do that. I hope you continue to spread the word about this show. Not because I want to go big or go Hollywood with this. That's not the goal of the show. The goal of the show is to spread the word. Open eyes, ears, and minds about mental health. Cheers to all the people like the Bryn Saltises, the Paul Coachellas, the Liz Matowskis out there who are trying to bring more eyes and ears to mental health, especially with athletes who feel like they have nowhere to go. That's simple. Thank you. I appreciate you checking it out. Thank you for checking out episode 11 of The Space Between Your Ears. Presented by Godzilla Media. Sponsored by Mohawk Honda. Sponsored by Johnstone Supply. I have nothing left. But I appreciate your patronage. I appreciate you taking the time to listen or watch, whatever it may have been. And we'll see you next time. TTFN. Ta-ta for now.